Good evening. Thank you all for coming to join us tonight. Sorry for starting a couple minutes late. We were having some technical difficulties. But thank you so much for joining us at the Science Cafe and our lead on to our AI series. Can you guys hear okay? That's not too loud. No. Fabulous. Thank you again for joining us tonight. Tonight we are lucky and fortunate to not have just one luminary from our local area, but two. Which is good because we're tackling an enormous topic tonight. We could fill hours and hours without a doubt of talking, but we're going to try to focus on some highlights. This evening we have Dr. John Quackenbush. Both of our speakers tonight have so many accolades behind their names that I really took a while trying to filter it down. But John is the chair of the Department of Biostatistics at the Harvard School of Public Health, as well as a professor at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute and Brigham Women's Hospital. He has founded a startup that helps to bridge the gap between clinical and research care, and is a well-published author, among other things. So thank you for coming. And Dr. Ding. Oh, sorry.
No, it's a pleasure to be here, so thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. And Dr. Ding, also a distinguished professor of computer science at UMass Boston, and the executive director of the Paul English Applied AI Institute. In addition to that, she is the program director for the National Science Foundation Division of Information and Intelligence Systems, and in her spare time, she helps support the youth of Lexington by forming a STEAM organization, amongst her many other things and publications. So thank you very much, Dr. Ding.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice to see all of you here. Thank you.
So this evening, because we wanted to let both of these professors give you sort of a background of where the domain knowledge of medicine meets the AI knowledge, we have a small slide presentation, but then we'll go right back to a more typical Science Cafe format of kind of interactive conversation. So we'll start with Dr. Quackenbush.
So my name is John Quackenbush. I have a PhD in physics of all things.
And that.
Oh, there I am. Look, larger than life. So I have a PhD in physics. I can tell you my story if you ever want to hear it. But in 1992, I got a 5-year fellowship to work on something called the human genome. And if, maybe on the next slide, but the human genome is a collection of DNA in every cell, right? And so in the late 1990s, or late 1980s, early 1990s, this idea developed that what we could do is read off what's called the sequence of DNA. So it's a series of letters, A, C, G, and T, right? And buried in that genome are genes. And it turns out there are about 25,000 genes. The letters are subunits we call bases, the A, C's, G's, and T's. The size of the genome is about 3 billion bases. And 3 billion is a number which I don't quite understand. It's slightly higher than my salary, a tiny fraction of the national debt. But to put it in perspective, 3 billion is the number of seconds in 95 years. Okay, so if you started counting the minute you were born, the second you were born, and counted a base a second, you go through 1 copy of the genome in a very long life. And you actually have 2 copies of the genome, one from your mother, one from your father, right? So buried in the genome are genes, and the genes are the blueprints for making proteins. And I think of a cell as a little machine made of proteins. And we know that the genes in the genome control our traits, right? Eye color, hair color, skin color, but risk of developing cancer or diabetes are all influenced by our genes. But the genes aren't just a universal singular thing, right? The same genes in a brain cell are present in a liver cell. And hopefully your brain cells are making neurotransmitters and your liver cells are making digestive enzymes, not the other way around, which means that these pieces, these genes are turned on and off differently in different cell types. In the same way in my brain cells and your brain cells and my liver cells and Wayne's liver cells, the genes are turned on differently. And the way they get turned on and off actually influences our risk of developing disease, how well we process different cellular metabolites. I mean, the whole process is governed by the set of rules that activate or deactivate genes. We think about them as being complex networks. And so the work that I do is actually involved, and I got my start working on the Genome Project in 1992, so it's gone for more than 30 years. And now we're at the point where we're collecting data on lots of individuals and patterns on how genes turn on and off. But we're trying to use that to reverse engineer the circuits that run stuff. And so you can imagine with 25,000 genes, with 2 copies of genes in every cell, with complex processes turning them on and off, this is a big computational challenge. And so what we're trying to do is understand the basic logic that allows cells to function. And to do that, we need to process large quantities of data. We need to try to make sense of it. And we need to apply a lot of really advanced computational techniques. And I can talk about lots of those at some point. Wei is going to talk about some of them. But we were actually talking today about a project we're working on. And one of the analogies I used is we're trying to learn these dynamic processes of how cells run, right? But all we have are static snapshots. And actually, Wei was asking, well, can't you just follow a cell over time? But the way in which we collect data destroys the cell. So we can't get these continuous pictures of what's happening. So what we do is we take snapshots of individual cells. And the analogy I gave her was it's like trying to learn the rules of football by opening the Sunday paper and seeing 3 or 4 pictures of a football game, right? You have to figure out how to put them together. You have to figure out what the logic is. And you can take thousands of pictures, but without the order and without some kind of higher order principles, it's hard to make sense of it. So what we've been trying to do is to take the kind of data we can generate and we infer what we call gene regulatory networks. We have a whole bunch of software tools we've developed to do that. We name them after animals. Why? Because it's easy to remember cute names. And the very first method we developed is called Panda. Somebody laughed, you know why? Because pandas are cutest animals in the world, right? So we have panda, we have paca, we have lioness, we have condor, which isn't so cute, we have monster, we just have a new method called Phoenix, but we've been developing these in the collection of software tools and what we call the networks. But we really rely on having access to these advanced computational techniques to make sense of the kind of data. And partnerships with people like Wei are fundamentally important for us being able to advance understanding the biology. But I don't know what else. Oh, I guess the last thing here, I have no idea what the slides are, so it really is karaoke. But this is just what really drives a lot of what we do, right? We think about the universe that we live in right now in terms of the scientific and medical universe as being one driven by data, right? I wear a Fitbit, I get all kinds of data about what I'm doing all the time. My wife stops at CVS, and every time she goes in, she swipes her CVS card because she wants the extra bucks. So they know more about the state of her health than her physician does. But one of the things that we've really been fortunate to have access to in kind of what I do is immense amounts of genomic data, right? So the first genome that we sequenced, the first 3 billion ACs, Gs, and Ts we read off, was estimated to cost over $3 billion. Nobody really can tell you how much it cost. But in 2001, right after the genome was sequenced, the estimate was that to sequence the next genome would cost about $100 million, okay? The cost started falling, and then there was a huge decrease. So this is a logarithmic scale. There was a huge decrease in the cost of sequencing a genome. And by 2009, the cost had fallen to about $100,000, right? And at that point, one of the questions you could ask is, well, if I find a variation in the genome, what can I do with it? And I used to say, and I meant it at the time, if my wife or son had a rare cancer in 2009, I'd mortgage our house and sequence their genome because it might help inform how to treat them. Now the cost is about $1,000. It doesn't take years like the first genome or months like it would have done in 2009. I can sequence your genome overnight for $1,000 or less, right? I can pay for it with a credit card. And that fundamental difference, right? No longer mortgaging the house, but sequencing genome for $1,000, paying for it with a credit card, has fundamentally changed the way in which you collect data. So we live in this time where there's an abundance of data. The challenge is how we make better use of it to improve the quality of healthcare, to improve our understanding of biological systems, and to improve the quality of life. So I don't know if anything else can come up, but I'm not going to take anything else. I'm going to let Wade talk because we're going to discuss, we're going to have a conversation.
So John talked about the biology, then I want to talk about the AI from the computer science point of view. So I want to tell you, so I'm from computer science. So computer science is totally different world compared to biology, because what happens in computer science is we define everything. Okay, we define program, we define variables, we define algorithms, and then we define what we want to do. So it's a human development. And then biology, I always tell my students, the computer science is great because you define everything, you know how to solve the problem. But in the biology, everything like what John mentioned is defined by the nature. So you have to find the patterns. Okay. And then, so computer science, I think it will be useless if we don't help the human scientists to solve the real problem in the world. So the computer science by nature is problem solving, and by nature we need to be able to collaborate with people in the scientific domains and to do scientific discoveries. So this is so important. And John keep talking about he has huge amount of data. And I want to know is for the AI, we always have a problem, especially when we collaborate with the scientists like John, the data is never going to be sufficient for us. Because what happened here is even he has huge amount of data, but the problem he tries to solve is too ambitious. You know, John is always so ambitious. The question is, you know, the problem he throws out at me is always like, oh, okay, I don't know the solution because it's too difficult, too hard. Okay, it's kind of like even the data is not sufficient for me to find an answer. It's kind of like I'm looking for another Earth in the universe. So this is the scale of difficulty we're facing at. So then I want to talk about AI because people have questions about what is AI. So I'm actually, so in this slide, it's really the AI from the computer science, engineering, mathematical field. So we say this is like thinking or acting rationally. So that means you're looking for, you try to do the problem definition, you're looking for solutions by building a mathematical model, okay? And then you're using statistical analysis, you're using the, you know, even for the deep learning, fundamentally, you're still using the statistics tools at different levels. You're looking for patterns. So this is actually one aspect of AI. And actually, you may get other AI talks talking about thinking or acting humanly. So they actually try to figure out how the brain really functions. So those is from the cognitive science. So this is also part of AI. But I'm from this field of AI, but you can see here, there's so many branches here. So currently what I'm working with John is on the first three branches, deep learning, supervised, unsupervised learning, and machine learning. And then, of course, the other things related with my other research projects, but the work with John is on the top three ones. And then, so do you want to, can you go back to my slides? I want to talk a little bit about collaboration, my background. Okay. And also I want to mention how important for the computer science people to collaborate with the scientists. So at the beginning, I started my research with NASA research projects. Why? Because I'm collaborating with the NASA scientists. So then after I came to UMass Boston in 2008, and then at that time, I think it's President Obama actually finished the space research programs. So that provide money for my research. So I run on money. Okay, I don't have money. Okay. But as a tenure track assistant professor, I need some research grants. Otherwise, I'm going to be fired by my university. So I was panicked. Thinking, okay, what should I do? So I found, of course, I'm at Boston, right? Boston, you're not talking about the space science. You're talking about we have so many hospitals, right? So I think, okay, I need something related with health. So I'm looking for a collaborator in health, but I know nobody in Boston. I'm new in Boston. So what happened is at that time, UMass Boston has a U55 grant. It's a huge grant collaborating with Dana-Farber. Okay. So what I did is I sent to the person at UMass Boston actually who is connecting with the Dana-Farber. So with my resume and said, okay, so this is what I'm doing in NASA, in space science. So I'm looking for a new collaborator. So this is a co-star, okay, new collaborator in health. So can you help me distribute my resume? And then I'm looking for help, looking for collaboration. So I think I get the response within the same day. Okay, do you want to, how did you see my email?
I don't remember. But, you know, I thought it was really interesting the way I've been working on this problem. She's
On
actually,
Mars.
pardon?
On Mars, I'm working on Mars.
Trying to detect impact craters on Mars from photos. And I saw that a photo is made up of pixels, and what you really have is a whole series of images in a big matrix. It's trying to find patterns in that matrix. And I think in analogies, I think a lot in analogies. So I was thinking, well, if we have a whole bunch of individuals, all of whom have mutations, can we try to find patterns of mutation in that big set of data? And the analogy I gave way at the time was it's like having a polar bear on a piece of ice, and you want to try to spot the polar bear, right? Because we have, you know, maybe the nose and the eyes that are dark, but everything kind of blends in. And so it's really an image recognition problem, the way it's sort of formulated. And that's how we started talking about working together.
Yes, that's how we started working together for around 10 years. So we published papers in computer science conferences and journals, and also in the top cancer journals. I learned a lot from John's team, and I think we can also benefit from the computer science advanced AI. Okay, so starting open for thinking, prepare a bunch of good questions.
Absolutely, with your whole team. But so actually you're leading right into the first question, which is this collaboration seems so strong and beneficial. What are you working on lately? This was for you, John.
It's a very exciting problem. Can you show my slides with AI in the science sensible AI? Because what happened here is John keep giving me new inspiration to design new algorithms. Yes, basically what I want.
Well, so the problem that Wei and I have started talking about working on, and we're working on now, we're actually working on a grant application. And it's this idea that I was talking about earlier about having static snapshots of health and disease, and really trying to learn how our systems evolve from being healthy to being diseased. And it's sort of based on the understanding that we oversimplify things often in doing science, right? So I can say health and disease. And one of the diseases I work on is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, emphysema. And we often compare people with emphysema to quote unquote healthy smokers, right? And there's no such thing as a healthy smoker. But if you look at the smokers, they're not a uniform bunch. There's a distribution between some who are very healthy and some who are near the border of disease. And then if you look at people who have COPD, there's some who have very modest disease and some who have very severe disease. So you can think of them as kind of a continuum, and you can think of them as kind of overlapping. And then if you take that perspective, you realize that they're on a journey, and not all of them are at the same point. And so you can start to think about what we call pseudo, right? It's not real time, it's not all starting at the same time in any case. But they're sort of along this path. And so it's like this analogy of football and learning from pictures in the newspaper. We want to take these snapshots of their genomes and the genes that are being turned on. We want to order people along a progression, and we don't know what the right progression is. And then we want to infer the rules that govern how they move along that path. So it's conceptually an interesting idea, but when we're measuring 25,000 genes and their patterns turning on and off, and there's lots of noise in the system, you need somebody who can pick out craters on Mars, right? From blurry satellite images or blurry images taken from Mars. And that's the kind of, that's kind of the way we connect and think about these problems.
Yes, because the search space is huge. So that means you're looking for the patterns in such huge other possible options. So John was smart. So he actually, if we give him enough time, he can live for a million years. He will be able, he can do the calculation, he'll be able to figure out the solution. A million years is too long for human. Okay, so we have a short life. So the idea is we want to use the power of the machine because this big machine can work for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right? So we can design the algorithm okay, AI algorithm. And then what we want to do is want to incorporate John's domain knowledge into the design of the algorithm. So that's the idea. For example, we could design the deep learning model based on the network. The gene regulatory network is just mentioned into the algorithm design. Then we're looking for the patterns to see how the disease change among different states. So because this is important for the scientist to truly understand what's going on this disease. So the idea behind machine learning is we want to leverage on the computational power of the machine and then ask it to do the calculation, the huge amount of calculation. So that's the idea.
So following up on that, you are using unsupervised machine learning to continue to solve this problem. Can you explain a little bit about that concept?
Yes, so unsupervised, so for the machine learning, we can do two different things. So if you know something about the problem domain, we do supervised learning. So what does supervised learning mean? So I have a training data set. So for example, on the maybe on the first row, so we have 6 people working as the example for the training, okay, for the training data, and then label them. So lazy or hardworking, okay. Lazy person and hardworking person. Okay, then I train the machine model based on the 6 samples, and I learn the patterns. What kind of person actually a hardworking person? What kind of person a lazy person? Then I'm going to go ahead, classify the rest of the audience, and then to label. So this is called supervised learning. So that means I have a clear understanding about what are the features for the lazy people, what are the features for the hardworking people. Okay. The unsupervised learning. So John talked about the problem, right? His problem actually is more related with unsupervised learning. Unsupervised learning means we even don't know what is correct. Okay, we have some idea about the patterns. We do have some underlying principles, but we don't exactly know. We cannot make a clear definition what is accurate, what is wrong. So then we ask the machine, can you do the job? So this is unsupervised learning. We cannot label anything, but can you identify the patterns among the data set? I give you enough number of data sets, can you figure this out? And actually, Google has done a really successful project. So he feeds the deep learning model with enough images of cats and dogs. And then the model actually eventually was able to know their cats, their dogs. So if we have enough amount of data, that same thing happened to the ChatGPT. So the reason for the ChatGPT becomes so successful because it is able to understand, process the whole internet data. Okay, but the ChatGPT also has unsupervised learning plus supervised learning as both. Okay. Which is where we talk a little bit about autoencoder you use in the Phoenix.
So, well, we don't actually use it in Phoenix, but one of the things we're very interested in trying to do is, I mentioned trying to order samples in what we call pseudo, right? Who's earlier in the disease stage, who's later in the disease stage. And so what we do is we use, we've been experimenting with the machine learning tool called an autoencoder, right? And the problem that we have, we talk about lots of data, but we also have very little data. If you have 3 billion bases in the genome, there's 7 billion people on Earth, right? And so you have 2 copies of the genome, it's about 6 billion, but we don't have DNA sequence on all of them. So if we really want to learn all the rules, for all the measurements we make, we need at least that many individuals so we can start to learn rules. So we're stuck in this place where we might have 100 or 1,000, or in a big project like that's going on in the UK called the UK Biobank, they have 500,000 individuals for whom they have the whole genome sequence. That sounds like a lot, but in terms of the data we're trying to learn, it's not. So we make measurements on the 25,000 genes, and we have health and disease. And what an autoencoder does is it takes that big group of data and it reduces it to a smaller dimension, right? So it's an unsupervised learning approach that uses information to find things that are related to each other. And so you reduce the dimensions down, but the rule is you have to be able to learn back the original data from the reduction, right? So it's not just random, you're not just walking things down, right? So if I wanted to characterize the size of people, right? I can look at your height, your weight, your shoe size, right? A variety of other things. And some of these are going to scale. The taller you are, likely the bigger your feet are and the more you weigh. But really, if I want to characterize size, it will be some combination of those. So I want to reduce it down to a size parameter, and then I can expand it back, right? If I run the rules the right way. And so what we're trying to do is get away from the problem that we really want to understand, which is this continuum. We say, okay, here's health and here's disease. Now we're going to, all these genes, we're going to learn the ones that point us in the right direction, right? Flowing downstream. And then we take everybody and project them onto that continuum. And so we're using an approach like that to try to order people. And we were talking today in ways of, well, how do you know what order is right? Because we really want to train the algorithm and validate it. And the answer is we don't. So we're trying to use these unsupervised approaches because we don't have the precise way of ordering.
We don't have the ground truth.
Yeah, we don't have ground.
Supervised learning have ground truth.
And I think that leads a little bit into the other side of this, which is what are the ethical considerations when you're using people's data like this? What are the risks? What are the risks of system bias because we have a lot of, you know, one type of people in the analysis and not the others, and how do we mitigate that going forward?
So there are all sorts of risks that appear in using data, especially data from individuals, right? Because your healthcare data, right? Every one of us is at risk for developing some kind of disease, right? Whether it's heart disease or diabetes or Alzheimer's, we all carry a risk. That risk, though, is mitigated by other factors like environmental exposure, lots of other things. But one of the things we always worry about is, number one, if I have data on your genome, if your insurance company or your employer or someone else gets access to that data, how are they going to use it, right? Are they going to deny you insurance coverage? Is your boss not going to give you training to move up in management because you're likely to have a heart attack, so why invest in you? Right? There are all these different things you can think about. So this is one problem. Another problem is, we okay?
I think you gotta need to separate people a little bit.
You move over here. So one of the things we worry about too is just bias in population studies. So there's this technique for sequencing genomes, getting data on variation, and predicting disease risk called the polygenic risk score. Right? So you look at many genes polygenic and you predict risk. But the problem with polygenic risk scores is that most of the individuals who are in these data sets are of European descent. And so they're strongly biased toward people of European descent. When you can get mixed populations and actually learn the rules, you do better not just for the groups that are underrepresented, you do better for everyone because you start to be able to tease out patterns of variation that may look like they're real in people of European descent, but are just noise in that system that you can tease out by looking at other individuals. So there are lots of potential sources of bias that creep in even to how we train our algorithms and how we try to learn the rules. And so we're always trying to go back and check how well does this perform in other populations, how well does it work when we look at situations we haven't seen yet, even though we don't completely have ground truth.
And also, I want to point out that is currently you're using Google, right? How many of you have never used Google? Raise your hand. So how many of you have never used ChatGPT? Okay, couple of you. I just want to know those tools using AI technologies a lot, and then they could and they likely bring the bias distributed results. So that means you shouldn't 100% trust what has been generated by ChatGPT or by Google. And think about the recommendation algorithm you to recommend new products, right? Recommend the articles, those could be biased as well. Because the thing is, I believe that people actually try to feed those AI models with misinformation. You probably find out, the misinformation is actually spread much quicker, more efficiently than truth and fact. For some reason, we like to spread misinformation rumors, right? The fake news, we think this is one side. So I believe we currently still in the chaotic stage. The ethics rules, the regulation, use of AI, we're still in a very early stage to make sure everything is well defined. So this is exciting and also scary because this is new thing. AI is a very new discipline. I want to know is because all the you're from physics, right? You can see for the physics, when we talk about the science in physics, you can find out they probably passed away 200 years ago. Okay. For the AI scientists, we still have people alive. Okay, the great AI scientists still alive. So this is a very new discipline. There's so many new things to be defined. So I think everybody should feel so excited because you actually are here to help to shape the future of AI.
But you know, sometimes the bias creeps in too, because the people developing the tools come from, you know, a particular background, particular subset. I mean, in talking with Wade about the work at UMass Boston, one of the great things is it's bringing in students from around Boston who all bring their own perspective, ask questions in a different way, think about problems differently, right? And I have one of my colleagues, actually, her office is next to me at the Harvard School of Public Health. We're supervising a graduate student who's looking at health risks that are related to food availability. And so we're looking at distributions of grocery stores and restaurants and other things projected on top of geographic information about risks of developing heart disease. And it's a really interesting project. And because we're grew up in the experiences we had, he's asking questions about the data and insight into the types of stores and food establishments that I probably wouldn't have thought to ask. And bringing that perspective is actually making the analysis a lot more robust, because by bringing these perspectives, you start to be able to tap into some of the sources of bias and at least acknowledge that it's not fully addressed.
Well, then that brings up the next question on the list, which is how accessible are these tools at present? Is it feasible for small companies, startups? I know when you were working with accessibility, right? Broadening out their availability because you have more people working, more data, more insight.
The nice thing about computer science community is this community is designed to provide open source tools to the whole society. So all those tools, I believe, at least at entry level, is free to charge. And then we not even provide free tools, we actually provide give the code. So you have everything, you have the routing, you have the raw code, you actually have to design and implement on APIs. So computer society is a pretty friendly and open society. So currently what I'm doing, so actually this afternoon I'm pretty busy. So we have a big donor, $5 million donated by our English to the Medicine and Biomedical Research. So he has the vision is to bring AI to everyone. And then we're working on the AI application hackathon. So the idea is we want to help non-CS students to create application using those great AI tools. And then for my STEAM team, we do have the plan to have an AI workshop in the fall. Okay, so the lesson come down already secure the space for us. We have even in the Brookhaven. Okay, so there will be a free AI workshop for the residents in Luxembourg. So we will teach you how to do AI applications, even you don't have CS major, because the nice thing about AI is it actually can help you to do computer science related projects, even without CS training. Okay, so now it's become possible. So I just want to know is don't be scared about AI, because I've often heard people talk about, I don't like AI, I don't like it. It's so dangerous in this job. I think that the right attitude is you should embrace AI. Okay, think about how you can leverage on the AI revolution and do something better. This is my attitude. And then stay tuned for the AI workshop we're going to do.
So my field, I'd actually describe it as computational systems biology. I teach a course, and part of that course, one of the things we do is we have students do some data analysis using the R programming. And ChatGPT is a great tool for writing our code or debugging. So you can throw in a piece of code and say, what's wrong with this? And tell you what's wrong or make suggestions. The other thing that we do, you want to talk about ChatGPT?
I want to say why ChatGPT can do a good job generating code in R, can do debugging in R. This is because the computer science community shares so many open source code online. So ChatGPT will be able to grab those open source data about R coding and then help John's team to do the R code debugging, right? So this is the thing actually is really good and run by the AI, brought by the AI.
The other thing to think about too is if you want to break into this, there are great online resources that are free, like Khan Academy. You can learn about artificial intelligence, machine learning. You can learn to code in R. The other language we use a lot is Python. Python is really powerful for doing machine learning stuff, and you can learn it online. I'm somebody who has embraced open access to science and reproducibility. So all of the software tools we develop are open source in both R and Python. If you come and find that, if you do a search online for the network zoo, you'll find our website. And if you look in the left-hand column, you'll find a link to something called netbooks. And this is a set of online Jupyter notebooks where you can actually go through and every paper we write, you can execute. So you can reproduce the analysis from the paper, but you can step through each step of the process and understand our code and how we do the analysis. If you want to do this, I'll just tell you that you have to get a GitHub account because we used to make it fully open, but then we had people hacking in and mining Bitcoin. So and we were paying for them to mine Bitcoin, so that wasn't a good thing. But you know, the community across the board, everybody who's working in computation is really committed to this idea that it should be open, it should be free, it should be accessible.
Fascinating to live in a world where you can hack and make money off of somebody else's computer system. And also a world where you can have some of your slides written by ChatGPT. So on this idea, what is the promise of medicine and AI and research over the next decade?
So, you know, I don't think I'm going to be out of a job anytime soon, which is a good thing. You know, people talk about AI as replacing scientists, you know, replacing drug discovery. It's not a tool that's going to replace that. It's a tool that's going to augment what we do, right? It can help us find things in data. And that's really the challenge, right? Unsupervised and supervised treatment. It comes down to being able to find patterns. But at the end of the day, we don't know what the true answers are until it's going to be validated by humans. We also don't know how to design these systems in ways that necessarily are going to perform properly. And so having domain knowledge, which is the way to talk about why our partnership works well, is my domain knowledge helps inform the way in which we build systems. And that's important because we can constrain the system. So this problem of too many measurements, but not enough individuals who can make those measurements can be mitigated to an extent by the fact that we limit the number of interactions between all of these different measurements, different elements, based on what we know about how systems work. So there are a lot of different opportunities. And there are places where we're already starting to see AI not replace people, but help them work better. And we were talking about some of these earlier, like radiologists looking at x-rays to diagnose cancer or COPD or other diseases, right? AI systems can be shown thousands and thousands and thousands of images and learn to recognize them. But they don't know how to recognize things that are rare in the data. So having a radiologist have areas flagged and say, oh, it looks like there's a TB infection here can be helpful, but they might not spot the lung cancer that's next to it. And so really being able to have this partnership between a trained specialist and a system that's going to help them is no different than you going and using Google to try to find out where to, and Yelp, try to find out where to have dinner tonight after this cafe is ended. So, you know, I don't think we're going to replace people, but I think there's really an opportunity to streamline processes, to augment the system. And one of the things we were talking about is just a shortage of healthcare workers to start to automate some of the basic things like taking patient history, But you know, AI systems are never going to replace you sitting down and talking to a physician and saying, it hurts when I do this, right? It's really going to be ways of streamlining the process.
And then, for example, a student graduate from nursing school, if they, with the help of ChatGPT, probably can provide good advice for the patients, like for them to see the regular family physician. So we can see the good doctors really focus on the heart disease. And also the human in the loop design is always going to be good with AI. And also I want each of you to be very proud of yourself, because for each of you, the brain you have here is actually it's a small brain, okay? And the computation power is actually slow. And it consumes very little energy because you only need 2 to 3 minutes a day, right? But you actually you're able to understand and perceive the world around you, which is way more complicated than the law. Okay, so that means for the artificial intelligence, we actually compare to what can be produced here, we're still in the infant stage. Okay, we don't truly understand what's going on with human intelligence. So that is why each of you can be really proud of yourself, because you're able to perceive a very complicated world in a very efficient way. And we don't know exactly how this can be done.
But yeah, this sort of really interesting way to think about this, right? The human brain has evolved over millions of years of evolution of life, and we're very good at finding patterns, right? So humans evolved to find patterns. If you're looking at something in the trees and there's a lion there ready to eat you, you want to be able to pick up that lion pretty quickly, even if it's indistinct. And so that's a good thing, but it's also a way in which we fool ourselves, right? I mean, who here hasn't looked up at the cloud and said, oh, there's the bunny, right? Or there's his face, or there's, my Uncle George at the cloud. You see things because we're trained to look and recognize patterns. The thing that's interesting about ChatGPT is and these large language models, is that they hallucinate too. They see things that aren't there. They recommend things that aren't there. And it's right now, I think, like we're in the early days of trying to tease all of this out and figure out how to make it work. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, but we have to recognize that the answers we get back are imperfect. I like to tell stories. Two of my postdoctoral fellows were working on writing a paper. They're actually both from computer science background, and they were writing about lung cancer. And so they asked ChatGPT to write an introduction to the paper describing basic facts about lung cancer, type of lung cancer called lung adenocarcinoma. And they got this thing back, and they asked ChatGPT to put in references, and it put in references. And then they started looking. They wanted to look up the references in a biomedical database called PubMed. None of the references existed. And so we started joking about the fact that, well, what we could do, we could actually cite those references and then write them ourselves. But you have to be very careful and take everything with a grain of salt, because these systems are still early, they're still learning, they're still being developed.
So I think we don't have a ton of time left, and I know there's a million questions here and online. So does anyone in the room have a question? We'll bring the microphone over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. So as your tools have gotten more powerful and the atmosphere has gotten a little more tense as far as the risk of what can happen with this information, how has your relationship with government changed as far as your work regarding like public health care?
So, I don't know if it's changed. And I think we've always recognized that the risks were there, right? From the time the first genome was sequenced, we could look, right, and look and find patterns of variation you have to worry about, right? So Jim Watson, who discovered DNA, or the structure of DNA with Francis Crick, his was one of the first genomes to be sequenced as an individual gene. And when they sequenced the genome, there were certain genes whose sequence they didn't publish because it was known that certain mutations carry risk of particular diseases. And one of the genes that I believe was hidden from Watson's genome is a gene called ApoE. And there's a mutation in ApoE that if you carry that mutation, it increases the risk of developing Alzheimer's. right? So your genome was sequenced. What would you want to have available? Would you want that available? And you'd have to ask yourself. But the other thing that's really interesting is this idea of privacy and how we safeguard it is sometimes a generational, right? And I don't know if I'd want my ApoE gene sequence available because my grandmother died of Alzheimer's. But my nephew, when he was in college, he's a little bit older now, but when he was in college, his mom was his Facebook friend. And she could see in real time the debauchery he was participating in that I still won't admit today that I ever did or did not participate in when I was in college, right? So, privacy is sort of a moving target, and we really have to think about how we manage this. So the one thing we do recognize is that we have to work in partnership with government to establish strong regulation that safeguards our privacy and how data is used. But we have to balance that with the need to be able to share data and information in ways that allow us to make advances. Because if no one was willing to share their healthcare data and information, right, we'd never be able to put together the pieces to allow us to connect the dots to link patterns of genetic variation with disease risk. So it's always balancing things like individual privacy, cultural concerns, individual concerns.
And also for research, anything related with human subjects, we have to go through the IRB examination. We have to pass the certificate, and then we have to go through many training. And also for the AI algorithm, we need to focus on the privacy concern. So that means we have to de-identify human subjects and make sure that people cannot connect dots and then identify the real human subject. So
we have some questions online, but we're in the room first.
So I'm not sure if this is the right question for you, but I'm going to ask you anyway. What companies, like you guys work a lot in the research, and that's very exciting. Where are we in terms of private sector not only participating, but coming out with real products, and what companies are actually leading, and when do you think, what time frame do you think, if they will ever have products that everybody can use, it scalable and useful?
well, I believe already have a service available for regular users. For example, Google provides for that. So you are able to use a free cloud service to do lots of calculation. Lots of my students are taking advantage of that. So,
that I'm aware of, but I'm talking about AI in medicine specifically. The medicine companies, the companies that are in, whether it's pharmaceuticals, whether it's healthcare, like, where you're gonna, for example, there's a roadmap, you'll say, oh, you know what, we're working with so and they're gonna have this out by this time. Anything anywhere near there?
So I will tell you, I'm phenomenally bad at remembering names. And I can think of companies I know that are really, they're leading in different areas. So one is in histology. So looking at tissue sections in slides, and if you had a tumor removed and they're going to try to, or a biopsy, they're going to try to see if there are tumor cells there. There's a company here in Boston that's actually pioneered a lot of the use of image analysis to identify tumor cells. And for the life of me, I can't remember the name of the company. There's another company that's consumed large amounts of data on chemical structures and their activities, cell line data as to how they affect different cells and alter their processes, that are trying to look at drug discovery to find new structural compounds that might have particular alterations. There are lots of companies like that that are getting off the ground. But if you think about it, AI is starting to infiltrate everywhere. If you do a Google search now, at the top, there's an AI attempt to synthesize the results of the search and give you an answer. And we're starting to see that almost everywhere. If you start to look at their tools online now, where you can look for best drug prices, they actually use AI systems to sort through different information about cost and reimbursement and point you to the nearest local pharmacy where you might be able to get the best price on whatever drug you're going to buy. So it's sort of creeping in. It's not always apparent where it is. but it's really starting to be a part of almost everything.
One amazing thing about the AI community is we provide those machine learning AI tools that you can call the function directly. So even you don't know how to implement that particular function, there is an API available free of charge for you to use. And then we have so many data online, so we actually will be able to take advantage of those free data and use those free API to do what you want. So because for the AI community, the cost, the entrance cost is low. You don't need to have expensive regular to do all those expensive experiments. You just need a computer. Okay. Now we have the super powerful server-side great computing service. You first need a regular computer to do the client-side, request. The server-side can do the complicated calculations and you get it like that. So this is amazing because you're using ChatGPT. What happens with ChatGPT is you're actually using the entire data on the internet. And if you use 3.5, like what I'm doing, I'm paying. I have a subscribe. So it's pretty challenging. You've got nothing here.
Well, that leads, if I may insert one from an online question about using AI to create personalized medicine, personalized medical treatment. How is it advancing that space?
So it hasn't reached that stage yet. And this is, I think everyone is looking forward to what we call personalized medicine, sometimes we call precision medicine. The idea is that our individual genetic backgrounds are going to influence things like how we respond to different therapies. And to date, a lot of the data we have is sort of one gene with a particular variant might increase or decrease the likelihood that you respond to a particular drug. And this is very exciting, particularly in oncology, where we look at mutations that occur in tumors that don't occur in normal cells. So we think of these as mutations that drive the disease. And cancer is really interesting compared to lots of other diseases because of the way we treat it, right? So if you have heart disease, you go to your doctor and say, fix my heart, right? If you had lung cancer, you go to your doctor and say, cut this tumor out of me. So we're not trying to repair the tumor, we're trying to kill it, we're trying to get rid of it. So a lot of oncology is based on trying to kill tumor cells. Well, a lot of the personalized cancer treatment has been developed around the idea that what we can do is find a mutation in a gene that alters the proteins in a way that we can target that protein with therapy that will kill the cell, right? But even the best drugs that we have that target those particular mutations in the proteins are nowhere near 100% effective. Why? Because that one gene that encodes that one protein is part of a large network of all 25,000 genes working together that influence whether or not you're going to respond. And so we have data on the individual pieces, but we haven't figured out how to put them all together yet. And so we're moving along that path, but we haven't gotten there yet, right? So there's still a lot of promise, and we can improve our predictions, but we can't yet get to the place where we can put all these pieces together and know for certain what's going to work or not.
And what I'm working with John right now is we hope we have AI-enabled scientific discovery can make the process more efficient. So this is what we want to do.
And a lot of what we're doing now is using AI tools to search through large data sets. So if we have a collection of 10 or 20 genes that seem to be linked to a disease, we have statistical tools for searching some data sets, but we really want to synthesize lots of information and find connections that we might not know up there. And so that's where these tools that are able to search massive amounts of data and find patterns can be extraordinarily useful in advancing our approach to identifying better ways of treating these threats and personalized medicine. But at the end of the day, you still have to test it, evaluate it, and use the information.
I have a question here. So you talked about, AI tools. What about the data source? You mentioned the, data privacy. Where do you get the data, right? Like my doctor has my blood pressure, has other data, but I don't think my doctor has my gene data, right? So where do you get that data? You know, how big is the size of your data?
So it depends on the problem we're working on. So there are databases at the National Institutes of Health, the National Library of Medicine, there's a center called the National Center for Biotechnology Information, NCBI. They maintain large data resources here, where if I do a study and collect data, I have to, in order to publish my papers, I have to put the data in one of these databases. Some are open because they're not identifiable. Others that have gene sequence data are actually in a database called dbGaP, and you can apply for use, research use, but it's very controlled, so we can't misuse the data. And there are growing numbers of projects, though, where, and these usually focus on a particular disease. There are a growing number of projects, though, that are trying to take genome data and integrate it with healthcare data. So I mentioned the UK Biobank, that's about 500,000 individuals. There's a project being run through the Veterans Administration, which has the advantage that everyone in the VA system has a unified health record, no matter what hospital you go to. And it's called the Million Veterans Project. And veterans are consenting to have their genome sequenced and linked to clinical data. It's not yet a million people. There may be a million people who consented, but they don't have data involved. At Brigham and Women's Hospital, where I go, they're part of a study called All of Us, and I have consented to be in All of Us. I've spit into tubes to have my genome sequenced and had many, many blood tubes drawn. And that's linked to my healthcare records in a way that's anonymized, so nobody can trace it back to me. But my health data can now be used with my genomic data to start to advance this kind of care. And I feel like I have to put my money where my mouth is. If I'm asking you to contribute your healthcare data, I should be contributing mine. So there are lots of projects like that where we are starting to collect data, and we're starting to build these robust databases. You know, there are probably around the world, 3 or 4 million people have been sequenced already. Not all of them will link to the kind of extensive data we really need to make sense.
So thank you. For me, if we want to contribute our DNA data, we could go to our hospital, you know, ask and say we would like to contribute our data, but without disclose our personal identification information.
Yeah, all of this is a really nice study. You can look it up online. Get a little app on your phone. You sometimes answer questionnaires about, you know, your lifestyle, you know, state of health. But it's a nice project if you want to start to learn about how we're collecting data in the modern world to really drive some of these forward.
Other questions, Drew?
This question, I'm not sure if it's completely appropriate. And I know, so
There's no inappropriate.
okay, good. So I've never gotten on a, you know, like, you know, the companies that do it for you, you know, you really, yeah, thank you. And because there's concern about political rivals owning the companies, and that you don't want to have your personal data in hands where, you know, you're not sure how it will be used. And I'm curious about whether you understand those risks, and are they founded or unfounded?
So I don't know about political rivals getting access to that data, although, you know, I'm not necessarily a big fan of 23andMe. In part because you're the product in a way. I mean, you're paying for the service, but they're mining your data. And I don't always know what they're doing with it. So I'm a little cautious about that. Yeah, it's sort of you have to balance what you feel the risk is and what the reward is. So every one of us is different. My wife is Greek. Her family comes from a little town outside of Sparta, and she keeps on thinking, well, should I have my genome sequence? I tell her to go to Ancestry because they have better population models that are linked to their genome data if you're asking Ancestry questions. They have all the genealogical trees people produce. But, her question is, am I really Spartan, or am I, Persian or Albanian or something, or Turkey or something else, right? Because, it's a place in the world where everybody invaded back and forth time and time again, right? Does it really matter? I'm not so sure. But I have a friend who is Irish can be. I think he bleeds Guinness if you cut him. And he had his genome scanned at 23andMe, and it came back as Basque. And he was fine with it. But, he said, I can't tell my father because he'll be devastated. And all I said is, well, probably what happened was when the Spanish Armada got sunk and, the sailors walked on shore, one of them met a pretty Irish lass, and here you are. So, it depends on what kind of stock you put in it, and, how important it is to you. But, it's always balancing risk and reward. And for each one of that calculus, you can use them.
And we have a large online group that is really eager to ask some questions as well. So if I may, how can AI be used to reduce high cost of medical treatment, promote patient rights, and make medical treatment accessible?
So again, that's a really great question, right? Patient rights is a hard problem to try to address, other than trying to improve equal access. And as we think about this problem outside of the scope of my work, sort of more generally, and I'm involved in a couple of working groups that are looking at AI and how it's applied. One of the things we really think about is bias, and making sure that everyone, independent of their background, has access to useful information. And some of that's in the information training systems that we use to train the systems. Others are just making sure the software and tools are freely available and open. There aren't hidden problems in the data, and I can talk about lots of examples you can find that. But some of it also is just helping, you do simple things like help hospitals reduce costs. So one of the examples I always like to talk about is MD Anderson Cancer Center in Texas brought in this AI group. And the first problem they turned them loose on wasn't accessing, it wasn't improving diagnostics or advancing research. It was actually managing their pharmacy, because they had pharmacies all over the hospital complex. And when drugs expire, they have to throw them out. And what they turned this group loose on was doing a better job of inventory management, so that they could flag drugs and transfer them between groups that were using them or not using them. They weren't being thrown out. They ended up saving about $2 million a month, which, has sort of an indirect impact on just reducing the cost. So I think we're still exploring all of this. And there are just lots of ways in which we can just sort of improve the system in the way this can work. Helping you find a physician, you can consult with, who's has expertise in your own particular area, can be one way where we can use information hospitals to help physicians not to say, oh, I know a guy, right? But to really look at the data and find somebody whose specialty is really in what might be affecting you, given your ethnic background, previous health history, whatever might be influencing your risk and progression.
Basic idea is, once we figure out how the humans solve this problem, okay, then we can design an algorithm based on this human solution. Then we can have this algorithm automatically do the calculation for you, that you don't have to pay for the service. Because anything related with human service is expensive. And also another thing is the huge success for the deep learning neural networks is actually inspired by the brain structure, the biological structure. So again, as you want to know is focus here of AI actually is learn a lot from how the human brain functions.
One of the other places, going back to healthcare, thinking about this, I have some friends who are working in a diagnostic testing company. They have an AI group, and they're working with some of the hospitals they partner with. And the whole goal in doing this, working with hospitals, is to get into their electronic health record systems and make sure that you provide assistance to physicians, so that if you have a certain set of indicators, the right tests are recommended, right? So the physician at the end of the day has to say, well, we're going to give this individual these tests. But given the background, the physician might not know every single indication for this test, not that test. But it can actually recommend them, and then the physician can look and make sure the right tests are ordered. And it's little things like that, sort of helping the system become more efficient, where I think we're going to start to see the most important early stage applications in the system.
So you can help the physician generate notes automatically.
We have time for one more question because the library will close in a few minutes here. Do we have any more in the room?
Well, you mentioned that AI can be used to understand better how the brain functions. Can you speak a bit more about that? In the form of consciousness, for example, which is not understood in humans, can AI actually help us understand how the brain thinks?
The AI help people to understand how the brain functions. So this is not my research areas. So it's on the other side. We're talking about the AI from the computer science and mathematical part. How so the latest thing I know, because what I've done is we actually get inspired by the brain structure and put the structure into the AI algorithm. So, but the other way around, I'm sorry, I'm not an expert on this. Okay.
You know, I think we're talking about different types of intelligence and different types of systems. So, you know, I think what we're referring to in thinking about AI and the brain is how brain structure really motivated a lot of what we're doing with things like deep learning. Okay, so there's this whole idea in biological systems called systems biology. It's based on an idea called emergent properties. And the easiest way to understand this is I might be able to take a brain cell and I might understand every single thing about how that brain cell works, right? So 50 years in the future, my understanding of how cells function is perfect. But even if I had that perfect understanding of how a brain cell works, it wouldn't tell me why I could think to ask the question of how a brain cell works. Because it's those individual cells working together that produces emergent property of thought and consciousness, right? And I can't tell you how that happens, but it's a really interesting challenge. But how do we think about the way in which the brain works and produces thought? Well, it's not a single neuron. Neurons have these large axons with synapses that allow them to stretch across big distances, and they have many of them, and they're connected to each other. Well, there are all these different pieces that are connected together that somehow interact with each other to produce intelligence, right? To be able to think, to be able to find patterns. If you look at the earliest neural networks, which is the basis for deep learning, you have different layers of inputs and outputs that communicate with each other. And part of the process of training a system is helping the system learn which connections are effective for solving a problem and which ones aren't. So there's sort of this analogy, but Wei was talking about your brain being a low-power computer, but it actually has many, many, many more connections than we could ever build into modern AI systems. So they're not exactly the same. They're sort of analogous to each other. But I don't know if we're going to solve the problem of these emergent properties, how liquid brain cells become us. But it can at least start to give us insight into how these patterns and connections can go towards solving particular problems.
So can I ask John to answer one short question? Because I know that we have parents and young students here, they're actually looking for career advice. So we're running out of time. Do you want to talk about what's your career advice for AI in health?
So I think just like we have a partnership where there's different areas of domain knowledge that's important. If you think about this, you want to sort of distribute your expertise across domains. So I tell people who are studying biological sciences to learn to program, right? You may not become an ace programmer, although ChatGPT can help you, but you want to at least understand the basics of what software and tools can do. So I would tell someone that's interested in medicine to absolutely pursue that because the domain knowledge is going to be important. But to also pick up some programming skills. I have a lot of students and postdocs that come from computer science backgrounds, and I tell them that what they have to do is pick up the domain knowledge, Because I'm in a biostatistics department, I often go to my statistician friends and find things that are statistically significant, but biologically irrelevant, right? You need that additional filter to sort of put things together. And having that domain knowledge can be really important. So not everybody who's working in computer science is going to be working in healthcare applications, but everybody in healthcare, no matter what, is going to have to deal with data. And, you know, I love quotes, and one of my favorite quotes is from Jules Poincaré: "Science is built with facts as a house with stones, but a collection of facts is no more a science than a heap of stones to the house." Right? What we really need to be able to do is to take all the data information and synthesize it and put it together in ways that are meaningful. And that's where that domain knowledge is important. If you do healthcare, the primary output of any machine you use to make a measurement is going to be data. It's going to go into an electronic healthcare system, record system that's going to be full of data, and your ability to tease things out of it is going to be driven by your ability to make use of large-scale data.
And also my take-home message is don't never be afraid to try to do anything new. So it's never too late when you try anything new. So I think for my personal experience is, you know, when you're working on an area, try to do the best. And then if you need to change your direction, you ask for help. You know, there are always people like John to answer your call, okay? So it never fail in a personal career pathway.
And don't be afraid to ask people and to talk to them and ask questions. I think that's really important. Some people will not answer your questions.
That's fun. You know, there are always going to be some people to answer the question.
Yeah, but there will be people who answer them.
Yes.
And you know, if you're a high school student and you get intrigued by a question that you didn't have a chance to ask today, if you're online, right? My name is Quackenbush. If you put in the Google machine, you'll find me pretty quickly because it's not a common name. You can laugh about it later if you like. But you know, if you send me an email and ask me a question, I may respond, I may not respond, but don't be afraid to ask. I'm pretty good at responding, especially if you say, I'm a student, I listened to your presentation with Wei, and I really love to hear the question. Try to answer it, may take me a few days. Don't be afraid to reach out, right? The people who do this because they love it, love sharing it with others and sharing the joy of what they do. Wei always talks about her students and how much she loves working with her students. She introduced me to today, right? And this is why we do it, because it matters, and helping people learn how to do it matters.
Thank you, Vince. That was some of the best career advice I think I've ever heard. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much.